Hi everybody, my name is Nina, and today I'll be talking to you about wine. So I know that I love wine, my glass right here, and almost everybody loves wine. Wine has been around since pretty much the beginning of human history, and we've seen in remnants of artwork and left behind crude materials to make wine that ancient cultures loved wine just as much as we do. But back in the day, they didn't know exactly how wine was made. So they basically knew that if they left this wine juice undisturbed for a certain amount of time, they would come back and find this brand new product. And now we know that wine is made by fermentation. And the fermentation is usually done by microorganisms, specifically yeast. And Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the most commonly used yeast species in wine fermentation. And it's used in a whole bunch of other food fermentations like bread baking and beer brewing. But a lot of winemakers now are trying to diversify the options that they can produce to meet consumer demands. And they're already taking into account the type of grapes that they grow and how they plant them, the soil that they're in, and the nutrients that are available. But really, the easiest way to change the way their wine looks and tastes is by using a different starter culture for their fermentation. So I will be talking to you about how non-Saccharomyces yeast can be beneficial in making different types of wine as compared to just using more commonly Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So with the fermentation, it's what makes the wine what it is. It's not just grape juice. So with the fermentation, it happens in 2 cycles. So this depends on the environment that the fermentation is in. So when there's a lot of oxygen available, they'll be going through the tricarboxylic acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, and that produces carbon dioxide and water. And then once all of that oxygen is used up, the yeast switch into a metabolic pathway of glycolysis, and that's when the ethanol is produced. So given these options, I'm just going to go over different other variables in the wine fermentation. So fermentation, like back in the day, a lot of winemakers can rely on spontaneous fermentation. So that's when they don't add any starter cultures, and they're really just relying on the native yeast species that are on the skin of the grapes and in the environment. So in a study in Switzerland, they studied the fermentation in steel tanks and kvevery. And kvevery are these clay pots that they stick into the ground, or they just keep them in a basement, and that's where the fermentation occurs. So they analyzed the yeast in the air and the skin of the grapes and in the different vessels for fermentation, and they compared to the end product. So in the steel tanks, they had ethanol-resistant Saccharomyces yeast, Saccharomyces bianus, and in the kvevery, there were 2 yeast strains found, and these were known to cause spoilage, and analysis of the wine that produced did result in higher than normal levels of acetic acid. But given that there was a shorter lag time in the fermentation, no spoilage was noticed. So really the environment of the Kefevri played a huge part in keeping the wine palatable and usable, seeing as how there was limited light exposure and also limited oxygen as well. More common than not, many winemakers rely on controlled fermentation, and that's really where, as it sounds, they have the most control over the product they produce and the type of microorganisms and the yeasts that are put into the fermentation system. So given that, this is why Saccharomyces cerevisiae is used the most, because it has very high ethanol tolerance, so it can keep increasing as the wine is being fermented. But they have found that the use of a yeast in the Turulaspera species, used in conjunction with the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, can produce increased tannins and other polyphenic compounds, and those are what give you the taste and the body of the wine. Another important consideration, the use of non-Saccharomyces yeast, or even using Saccharomyces cerevisiae, as the interactions that form between the different microorganisms. Even if you're only using Saccharomyces cerevisiae, you're still going to have those yeast-to-yeast interactions, and that's going to affect the nutrient levels that are available, because they're competing to use what is there. So they have found that using different inoculation times for the different yeast, usually the non-Saccharomyces cerevisiae followed by the Saccharomyces yeast, produces better wine because of the competition. The non-Saccharomyces yeast can grow and thrive because they're not performing alcoholic fermentation as high as rate as the Saccharomyces yeast are. So they can grow and proliferate even though they are not as ethanol resistant as the Saccharomyces. And then when the inoculation of the Saccharomyces yeast occur, the growth of the other yeast that was used will decline, and the Saccharomyces will grow and do the complete fermentation. So as I mentioned before, the non-Saccharomyces yeast don't really do alcoholic fermentation like the Saccharomyces cerevisiae do. So when using a higher concentration of these non-Saccharomyces yeast, we can produce alcohol at lower levels with the fermentation. So another factor in fermentation is the temperature, and most Saccharomyces cerevisiae, they are not tolerant to lower temperatures. But there is a type of yeast, the Candida Saccharomyces yeast, which can be used to produce wine, that are, they do tolerate very low temperatures. And this specific yeast also produces glycerol when it performs the sugar metabolism for the fermentation. So when you use this yeast in your starter culture, not only can you have it perform at a lower temperature, but you'll also get a different type of wine with a different mouthfeel, because it'll have a higher viscosity and feel a little bit thicker. So good thing for all of us, we have a reason to drink wine. and it is heart healthy, and that is because of the phenolic compound resveratrol, which can be found in wine. It's the main dietary source of resveratrol. So these non-Saccharomyces yeast have a higher beta-glucosidase activity during the fermentation, and this has been found to increase the concentration of resveratrol. Because of the production of the enzyme, the glucosidase, more resveratrol is produced, leading to a healthier product for all of us. Shout out to the winemakers that have already been consistently using non-Saccharomyces yeast in their fermentations. Specifically, the most commercialized non-Saccharomyces yeast available is Turlospora delbrueckii, and that has been found also to have the high beta-glucosidase activity, and it also produces a higher concentration of ester compounds, and that's what really contributes to the flavor and the feel of wine, and it gives us a great tasting wine. So we know that non-Saccharomyces yeast species do have a place in wine fermentation. As of right now, usually it does have to be in conjunction with the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, just because of the alcoholic fermentation, and co-inoculation has been working wonders when you inoculate with these yeast sequentially. So more research can be done into using different yeast species, including possibly genetic modification, and that is all for the non-Saccharomyces yeast. Thanks for watching.